General, please be seated. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest here today and to all of you to our Greater Issues address. The Citadel is honored to have General J. Raymond, United States Air Force, as our speaker today. General Raymond joins a long line of distinguished guests who have come to this place, our Citadel, since Mark Clark inaugurated the Greater Issues series in 1954. We want to recognize the Mills B. Lane Foundation for its generous support of this series, which has enabled us to host past presidents, American and foreign dignitaries, scholars, business executives, and military leaders. General Raymond is the commander of Air Force Space Command at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. In addition, he serves as the Joint Force Space Component Commander. As the commander, he is responsible for organizing, training, equipping, and maintaining mission-ready space forces and capabilities for the North American Aerospace Defense Command and the U.S. Strategic Command and all other combatant commanders around the world. His command is comprised of over 30,000 space professionals. They provide tailored, responsive, theater and global space effects in support of our national objectives. General Raymond, who earned his commission through the ROTC program at Clemson in 1984, brings to us today his 35 years of distinguished leadership, experience and knowledge to share with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for General Raymond.
We are providing effects to the battlefield today, and the fight's on. This is that space warfighting mentality that certainly wasn't there when I was a lieutenant. But we have operators today, right now, on console, on crew, in deployed areas, providing effects to a warfighter, and they are part of the fight today.
We need to be ready to react at a moment's notice at the drop of a hat in the event of a satellite being struck by an anti-satellite missile, satellites colliding in midair, or the ballistic missile launches. Any of those events are absolutely catastrophic.
3, 2, 1, 0.
We have got to prepare for the fight that is at our doorstep. We are providing.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Hey, first of all, let me say thank you, General Walters. Thanks for the absolute privilege of being here. when I was introduced as a Clemson grad, I thought it might have been a hostile environment, but I tell you, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to be here. I've got a lot of respect for this university. I wasn't from South Carolina. I lived in Washington, D.C. My dad was military in the Army when I went to Clemson, and I have many friends that went here and have served with many folks that have had the privilege of going to school here, and I'm really excited. It's a very exciting time to be in the national security space business. Probably the most exciting time that I have seen in 35 years of service, almost 35 years of service. And I will tell you that I've talked to folks that have served in the space business before me, and they said they've never seen this kind of excitement as well. It's a critical time. Not only is it exciting, but it's a critical time. And I'm going to walk you through this. There is nothing that we do as a joint force, absolutely nothing, that isn't enabled by space capabilities, whether it's humanitarian assistance, disaster relief type of operations, or combat operations, and everything in between. There's nothing we do that isn't enabled by space. And I'm going to walk you through kind of how we got to where we are today. The challenge is that integration of space into everything that we do provides us great advantage. Great advantage. And there's countries that don't like that advantage that it's providing us, and they are building capabilities to keep us from accessing space. And I'll walk you through that as well. And so we're at this, what I call a strategic inflection point. And this next video, short video, is going to highlight that strategic inflection point, and we'll kick off the rest of my talk. Play the next video, please.
Give me a range and grid to the target.
Range is 1,700 meters.
Hey, we're still waiting for the satellites to acquire.
Can I get a status check on all the vehicles over the target region?
Sir, all birds in area are healthy.
We have a good FOM on the GPS. Building grid 42 Tango, Charlie Whiskey, 982-468.
Roger. Give me a sensor over the target.
Bronco, this is Devil 3. We have eyes on the target area. Currently eyes on 3 Tangos. Requesting ISR to verify HVT.
Alpha 1, Bronco 5-3. Currently, Double 1 requesting to armed overwatch. Request you push to Double 1 at the following grid. 42, Tango, Charlie, Whiskey, 98.
Roger, Bronco, pushing to Double 1, and we'll contact him on yellow 01. Stand by for full 360. Looking for a positive ID on HVT1. How copy?
Good copy. Standing by.
How's the feed look?
Hey, what's the status of Alpha 1?
I show no interference. RPA Alpha 1.
Good handshake with Alpha 1. Double 3, your Reaper is on station. Call sign Alpha 1. How copy?
Good copy. Call sign Alpha 01. Requesting follow-on cast to our location as well.
Double 3, you have 2 F-16s inbound. TOT is 15 mics. Call sign Hornet 1. Double 3, Bronco 533. Be advised, we're showing indications of jamming over the target area.
Bronco, Devil 03, how do you read? Bronco, Devil 03, how do you read?
not only fuel our American way of life. How many people have a smartphone? That phone would be really stupid without GPS. And also fuel our American way of war. Everything in that video, from flying of the remotely piloted aircraft, is done over commercial communication satellites. Developing the target was developed with ISR from space or from those RPAs. The weapon that was used to strike that target was a GPS weapon that struck precisely. The weather that supported that pilot before he took off to make sure that, or he or she took off to make sure that he could fly safely was all done from space. So everything of that operation, the only thing that wasn't true, that wasn't the Middle East. That was Fort Carson and Colorado Springs. If anybody's here from Colorado Springs. But other than that, everything in that video shows you how space enables that one operation. You can take that across the Joint Force. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. My goal is to try to get through this in about 30 minutes. And then I'd like to open it up and have any questions. If you have any questions for me, have a question and answer period. Go to the next slide, please. So in the space business, the Air Force space business actually has been around since the beginning, 50, 60 years. But the command, Air Force Space Command, stood up 36 years ago in September. So the Air Force is 70 years old, space is 35 years old, and it stood up for 3 reasons. One, we were becoming more reliant on space. 2, there was a growing threat at the time, the Soviet Union, before the wall came down. And 3, there was about $10 billion going into space, and they said, hey, we need to stand up a command to be able to do that. And so Air Force Space Command stood up. And for the first, I'm going to break that 35-year period up into 3 different periods. The first period is building the command. And for the first 10 years or so, we took missions over from other Air Force organizations and consolidated them under Air Force Space Command. We took communication satellites out of the Air Force Communications Agency, brought them to Air Force Space Command. We took missile warning satellites and brought them in. We took the launch ranges at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg Air Force Base, where we do all the rocket launches, putting things into space. We brought those under the command. And for that first period of time, that's what we did. And when the command, so it stood up in 1982, when the command was about 8-ish or so, 7-ish, the Cold War ended. And when the command was 9 years old, we went to war for the first time in Desert Storm. If you go to the next slide. So as we consolidated this, I'll give you a little peek of what the command looks like today. You can see the numbers of folks. You can see the different locations. Headquarters of Air Force Space Command is in Colorado Springs. We have 5 wings in Air Force Space Command. One of them is at Cape Canaveral, where I just came from this morning. They launch satellites into equatorial orbit, geosynchronous orbit, like our communication satellites, like our missile warning satellites. We have a launch wing at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California that launches satellites into polar orbit. Satellites that go over the North and South Pole. And then we have 3 wings in Colorado. One that operates all of our satellites, like GPS, like our communication satellites. We have another wing that operates our missile warning satellites. And then we have another wing that operates global sensor network to do missile warning and space situational awareness around the globe. Those are the 5 major wings. We've got a 14th Air Force at California that's a 3-star numbered Air Force that runs all of space operations. We've got a 3-star in Los Angeles that runs all the space acquisition piece of that. And then we have squadrons and detachments spread out across the world to run that global enterprise, if you will, that's needed to run space. So we put all this together. Go to the next slide. And we did it just in time for Desert Storm. I'm going to give you a little history lesson. In World War II, when the Air Force went to war, and we needed to destroy a target, we would take 1,000 bombers, with 9 bombs on each bomber, 9,000 weapons, going after one ball bearing factory. And on a good day, about 100 of those would hit within a half a mile of the target. On a good day. 1,000 bombers, 9,000 weapons. In Vietnam, you can see the numbers. This is not any particular strike, but with the advances made in technology, you can see that the numbers significantly reduced. But in Desert Storm, we saw for the first time the value of integrating space into the fight and many call Desert Storm the first space war. It's clearly the first war where we took information from space and then integrated it into combat operations. Three things. How many people are in Army ROTC and Marines? You did the left hook through the desert. How do you do that at night when there's no road signs telling you where to go? You do that using GPS. We took, at the time, there were Scud missiles being launched at our forces, small missiles. Our big strategic missile satellites weren't designed for that, but we figured out how to do it, how to process data in stereo, and we were able to come up with a capability to detect against those small missiles and be able to say, duck over here or duck over here. Not great, but we were able to give some warning. And we saw the first instance where precision weapons were being used, largely not GPS at the time because the GPS constellation wasn't fully up, but it was more laser-guided munitions. But we saw on television where General Schwarzkopf or General Horner would talk about the luckiest person that drove over a bridge as the bridge was precisely struck. Go to the next slide. So that brings me into the next phase of the command, and that's integrating the command. And so what did the Air Force do at the end of Desert Storm? They took General Chuck Horner, who was the 9th Air Force commander here at Shaw Air Force Base when he deployed. And he was the first Joint Force Air Component Commander, JFAC. And when the war ended, they brought him to Air Force Space Command. And he showed up, I was a young captain. And I remember this as if it was yesterday, saying, hey, we saw, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we saw the goodness of integrating space into the fight, but we're not good enough. We've got to get better at this. And this started pretty much, the vast majority of my career has been spent focusing on integrating space into everything that we do. We stood up an Air Force, a space weapons officer school at the Air Force Weapons School, kind of the top gun. We have now developed space weapons officers out of that. That was done in the early 90s. We stood up an Air Operations Center out at Vandenberg called the 14th Air Operations Center. That has now grown and matured into what we call the Combined Space Operations Center, which is the C2 center that commands and controls everything that we do in DoD space. And it's focused on integrating space, again, into theater operations around the globe. We set up a position called the Director of Space Forces, where there's a colonel that sits in the AOC forward and is used as the translator, if you will. The CFAC says, I need something. And then that Space Force can reach back to the global space team and say, here's what we need. And then we provide those capabilities for them. We've integrated space officers across the entire theater. If you go to the AOC today, every single division has Air Force or Army space operators embedded in those divisions. And so, again, as I started out this conversation, there's nothing that we do, and you just have to hit the believe me button on this, but there is absolutely nothing that we do that isn't enabled by space. And it's because we have worked really, really, really hard to make that happen since Desert Storm. Go to the next slide. So I walked you through what 1,000 bombers in World War II. I walked you through Vietnam. I talked to you about Desert Storm. In Desert Storm, we had an F-117. It could take off with 2 weapons, and it could fly and strike 2 separate targets. Now let's fast forward to just a year or so ago, in a strike against terrorist targets in Libya. We had 2 B-2s take off out of Whiteman Air Force Base. Each of them had 42 weapons on it, all GPS-guided munitions. 84 weapons. They took off, and the vast majority of those weapons were targeted en route, again, using space capabilities. And when they got to their target, 84 different targets, perfect strikes against 84 different targets. How can that happen? It can happen because we've integrated space into that. So I would ask you, what would happen if we lost space? Do we have 1,000 bombers in our United States Air Force today? Nowhere close. So it's really critical that we protect these capabilities, that we not just integrate space into operations, but we also develop the capabilities to protect these. Go to the next slide. So, because of the advantage, as I said, because of the advantage this provides us, there are countries that are developing capabilities to keep us from accessing space. And you can look at, in 2007, when China shot down one of their own satellites and blew it into about 3,000 pieces of debris. We still track that debris today. We track everything that's in space, about 24,000 objects. And we act as the space traffic control for the world. So if one object is going to hit another object, we provide warning to make sure that that domain stays safe. And on average, about once every 3 days, we reposition the satellite to keep it from hitting another piece of debris, or somebody does based on our warning. It's a congested environment, if you will. But everything from low-end reversible jamming of communication satellites and GPS satellites, for example, all the way up to that kinetic destruction that we saw in 2007 are being developed. And the scope and the scale and complexity of that threat are very concerning. And so today, as I said, is not just good enough to integrate space, you have to be able to protect and defend it. Go to the next slide. And that gets to this third part. And it starts again in 2007 when China shot down their own satellite as a very visible fact that showed that the space environment had shifted to a contested environment and that we didn't have the luxury anymore of just operating in a benign, safe domain. It used to be as long as you could launch a satellite and the satellite survived launch and it survived what we called infant mortality, making sure that it didn't die with a mechanical fault after it shortly got on orbit. If you made it through that period, you were good to go. Today, that's not the case. And so just as we did in the integrating stages of space, we are now building all that infrastructure, all that capabilities underneath that are listed on this slide to be able to protect and defend. We stood up another ops center out at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado Springs called the National Space Defense Center. That center is focused on protecting and defending space. It's a center that's made up of intelligence professionals and military space professionals sitting side by side. And they are focused on protecting those capabilities. We stood up something called the U.S. Strategic Command Joint Force Space Component Command, which I am dual-hatted. I command elevating the operational component for U.S. Strategic Command from a 3-star to a 4-star. We've stood up, we've turned the Joint Space Operations Center into a Combined Space Operations Center. And we're really focusing on developing the allied partnerships in space, specifically with our Five Eyes partners, France, Germany, and Japan, to name a few. But we're developing those allied partnerships like we do in all other domains as well. And so our focus today has done a complete shift from integrating, which we know how to do, and we do it very well, better than anybody in the world, to being able to protect and defend. We're looking at different architectures for our space capabilities. We're looking at different ways to go about this protecting mission. Next slide. And so it's really clear today that space is a warfighting domain, just like air, just like land, and just like the sea. Yeah, the President of the United States said in the speech, space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea. You have a national security strategy that says assured access to and freedom to maneuver in space is a vital national interest. It goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, if anybody messes with that vital national interest, we're going to respond in a place, time, domain, and manner of our choosing. Have a national defense strategy that talks about great power competition, talks about conflicts in the future that are global, multi-domain, multi-regional, multifunctional. So the strategic environment has changed, and there's great alignment. There is absolutely great alignment and the fact that space is a warfighting domain. Next slide. And so I wanted to come here and just walk you through this. How many people feel comfortable or confident that they know what our military does in space? It's something that we haven't talked a lot about. Thank you, sir. It's something that we haven't talked a lot about. We've always been more classified in nature, kind of off on the side. But this is something that you need to understand, no matter if you're going in any of the services or if you're going into business. You should have an understanding of what space does for you in your day-to-day life. And I will tell you, as I said up front, these capabilities fuel our American way of life. There's nothing you do. How many people go to the gas pump and pay at the pump? It's because of space. How many people are in the farming business, agriculture business? You use GPS on a daily basis. There's nothing that we do as citizens that isn't enabled by space, and there's clearly nothing that we do as a joint military that isn't fueled by space. There's great opportunities here. If you're interested in going into the space business, there's every service has folks that work space. The Air Force has the preponderance, but the Army space capabilities and space career field is alive and well. The Navy is growing their space capabilities and their space career field. And I will tell you, I have deployed with Marine space operators as well. And so every service has this as a career field. And if you're interested, I will tell you, we need you. And we need you focused with a warrior mindset. Because again, space is no longer a benign domain, it's a warfighting domain. Go to the next slide, please. And so let me finalize with this video, and then we'll open it up for a conversation.
Aggression. Their target? Space. They don't have to dominate it, just disrupt it. Millions feel the effects. Banks, airports, infrastructure. Our prosperity could be at risk. And so could this. And this. And them. It's clear. Space capabilities fuel our American way of life and our American way of war. Yesterday's thinking will not defeat tomorrow's challenges. It's time to evolve, to change the way we protect and defend our vital interests in space. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines will all be called to defend the ultimate high ground. We must increase our capacity and capabilities by partnering with our allies, other government partners, and industry. By collaborating, innovating, and integrating, our space capabilities will be resilient, a combat-ready part of the multi-domain warfighting network.
We got to launch.
Stand by. Data building. Zooming in on grid. Whiskey Charlie 6. Check sources. Intel confirmed. Probable ASAT launch.
You have 2 for data release.
This is Sivers. ASAT launch from grid Whiskey Charlie 6. How copy?
Copy. ASAT launch. Initiating threat reaction.
Sir, I recommend a mission transfer from Spacecraft 4 to Spacecraft 6.
Any attack against our space capabilities
Execute.
will be met with a deliberate response.
Killing track 05877.
At a time, place, manner, and domain of our choosing. By working side by side, together.
Batteries release.
We'll compete, and we'll win.
In RU-12, we have good effects on the ground.
Ground forces are reporting the threat's been neutralized.
In RU-12, we have good effects on the ground.
Ground forces are reporting the threat's been neutralized.
Thank you, General Raymond, for those inspiring remarks. We now have some questions from the Corps cadets.
Great.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, sir.
Where are you from?
York, South Carolina, sir.
Great.
Today I'd like to ask, as the commercial space program starts to take off, how is that going to impact our national defense policy, and how does the civilian entering space,
Sure.
how does that affect our operations?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's a great question. Absolutely spectacular question. We are really reliant on commercial space capabilities. In the first video, you saw the SpaceX rocket with the 2 first stages coming back and landing. We don't have government rockets anymore. We basically buy commercial rockets and we use those to launch our satellites. And so we're very reliant on them on the launch. One of the things that's happened is that space capabilities, because of technology, smaller satellites are becoming more relevant, or more operationally relevant. And so in the past, you would have kind of one-off handmade wooden shoes, billion-dollar satellites that are really big, up in geosynchronous orbit doing some really nationally critical work. We're looking at diversifying that architecture. And one of the ways we're looking to diversify that is now capitalizing on this, it's a terrible word to use in the space business, but this explosion of commercial space capabilities. And so now you have companies like SpaceX, Elon Musk, building a satellite constellation of 4,000 satellites. Of the 24,000 satellite objects in space that I talked about, how many of those do you think are satellites out of 24,000 today? Roughly 1,400 active satellites. Everything else is a piece of debris, either a dead satellite or pieces of debris that have been caused by space operations. So we're talking orders of magnitude more, smaller, more production line model, and satellites that provide really good capability. So part of what we're thinking through as we speak is figuring out how to diversify that architecture. And I think what you'll end up seeing is it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think there's going to be some large satellites that are going to continue to do really critical work, and I think it will be supplemented with a larger constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit that will be largely commercial-based, or commercial satellites to fill out our capability. Today, the other big commercial piece that we use is commercial communication satellites. A significant portion, a majority of our communications today fly through commercial communication satellites. Like in that video where you saw RPAs flying, they're all commanded via links that are done over commercial communication satellites. But I think you're going to see a significantly increase. You're going to see us significantly increase our use of military satellites or commercial satellites across a full spectrum of military missions.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hey.
My question is whether or not you can speak to future U.S. intentions regarding the militarization of space beyond imagery and signal intelligence, especially given United Nations and NATO resolutions inhibiting the development of space operations.
Yeah, there's only one treaty that talks about what's prohibited or not, and that's the Outer Space Treaty done in the 60s. And all that treaty says basically, in a nutshell, is you can't have nuclear weapons in space. Let me be really clear, and I should have said this in my talk, but let me be really, really clear. We don't want to get into a fight that extends into space. People talk about a space war. My view is there's no such thing as a space war. There's war. And countries decide to go to war for whatever reason that they view as in their national interest, and they can choose to fight that war on the land, in the air, in the sea, or in space. And so there's no treaties that talk about not doing that. We don't want that. The best way that I know to deter that from happening is being able to be prepared to fight and win that conflict if deterrence were to fail. And so Our goal is the peaceful use of space, to keep it as a peaceful sanctuary. That's why we're being very transparent with sharing data back and forth, telling people to move so they won't hit other pieces of debris and make the domains unsafe for others to use. But our adversaries have taken note of the advantage that we have by integrating, and they're developing these capabilities that are concerning. And so we are going to be able, we are, and we will continue to be prepared to fight and win a fight that extends into space in order to deter it, and if deterrence fails, to fight and win.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No, thank you. Any other questions? I don't bite. Yes.
General Raymond.
Yeah, how are you?
How you doing, sir? With your experience in the Pentagon, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, how are you able to transfer those life skills that you learned from in those areas in leadership skills over to the Space Command?
Yeah, let me just give you, everybody has their own. First of all, in my opinion, there's no right or wrong way to be a leader. All right, and everybody. How many people have had good leaders, and how many people have had leaders that you didn't think were all that good? And you kind of learn from both, right? You learn from those that are new. You write in your notebook, hey, if I'm in a situation like this, I'm going to go down this path. And you write in your notebook things that you saw people do that didn't work that well, and you say, I'm not going to do that. Let me give you a few things that have worked well for me. And it's for what it's worth. You can put it in your notebook or throw it away. I think to be a leader, the first thing that you have to be able to do is to make sure that everybody in your organization understands their link to the mission. And so you as a leader need to tell the folks that you're privileged to lead, hey, here's why you are important, and here's why you come to work every day. And you need to make that very, very clear. I think the second thing that I think a leader needs to do is set really high standards. How many people joined the Citadel to be part of a so-so military college? No. You want to be part of the world's best military college. You want to set really high standards. Same thing holds true for our military. None of you that are going in any of the military services want to go into an average service. And so you set those standards high. The other thing then you need to do is hold the people that you lead accountable to meet those standards, and you have to hold yourself accountable to meet those standards. And then finally, the last thing I'd suggest to all of you, and all the things that I say today, you can forget everything I said about space, you can forget everything I said about leadership up until this point. The thing, in my personal opinion, is you have to be a good person. And you have to treat people with respect, and you have to treat people with dignity, and you want to treat people like you want to be treated. And I would say of all the things for each of you, no matter if you're going into military service, or if you're not going into military service, you're going into business or whatever, I would recommend that you do so being a humble leader and being a good person.
Thank you, sir.
No, thank you. It's a great question.
Time for one last question.
You're it. Don't screw it up.
Now, are aliens real?
You know, Yeah, it's interesting. I was just speaking to the Air Force Academy, and 4,000 cadets at the Air Force Academy, and that question came up as well. I will tell you, I don't go to bed worried about aliens. I go to bed worrying about making sure that you have the capabilities that you need for space. Let me just, if you give me 1 second, let me just finish by saying, again, thank you. Thank you for the privilege of being here. Thank you for being part of this school. Thank you for committing to service. either in your local community or in the military, I'll tell you the value of your service has never been higher. Never been higher. And the demands that we're going to place on you have never been higher. But the value of your leadership has never been higher. And so what I would tell you is take the time while you're here in school to practice leadership like Cadet Zorn's doing, where you can make mistakes and learn when the national security of the United States doesn't rest on it. And so thanks for the privilege and opportunity to be here. I wish you all the best, and I hope to have the privilege of serving alongside you here in the coming years. Thank you.
Again, thank you, General Raymond, for coming to the Citadel's Greater Issue Address. As a token of our appreciation, I present you with something that has a great deal of symbolism of this institution. This is a picture of Paget Thomas Barracks. One of our most identifiable icons. This concludes our program. Please join me in one more round of applause for General Raymond.
Thank you very much.
Will the audience please remain standing as our special guests depart?